Hi there, this is Elise Bennin, your marketing mentor. And this is the podcast for you if and only if you are ready to leave the feast or famine syndrome behind, and I mean for good. Have you ever thought about how you might look back on what you're doing in your business today? Will you be full of regret or grateful and satisfied or something else? On the day we recorded this episode, my good friend Loren Sherman closed on the sale of his 23-year-old contract furniture business. I thought it would be the perfect moment to reflect on what he'd learned in the laboratory that was his business. In part one, Loren articulated the through line of his 3 creative careers, so far, that is. He started as a set designer on Broadway, became an inventor and furniture designer, and now he is a therapy dog handler with the lovely Lena. We also talked about what I think of as business baggage. That stuff we drag from childhood into our adult life and that gets worked out, or not, in business. That's often what I mean when I talk about using your business as a laboratory for your personal growth. Working through and getting rid of that baggage, I do think it's possible for all of us. There are lots more tidbits and words of wisdom in part 1 of this conversation, so listen and learn. Welcome, Loren, to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Yes. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself momentarily, but I also just want to tee it up by saying we are celebrating today.
Yes.
Part of the reason you're here is because we're celebrating today. So as part of your elevator pitch, if you will, or however you're introducing yourself, today, everything changed. So just add that in as part of your little story.
Okay. Today, everything changed, and in a lot of ways, it didn't change. But here we go.
Okay.
So you want the whole, like a quick bio?
Just a quick, who are you? Why are we talking? And what changed today? And then we'll go into all the details.
Okay. My name is Loren Sherman. I will find out why we're talking today when Elise asks me questions. I fell in love with the theater in high school. I went into the theater and was in the theater for 20 years as a set designer on Broadway and off Broadway and regional theaters and so on in New York. And then I started a furniture company with a design that I had come up with for my own personal use, and eventually ended the theater part of my career. And so that was 23 years ago that I started the furniture company, and the official closing of the sale of it to the 2 people I have had running it happened about 3 hours ago.
Awesome. How do you feel?
I feel great. I feel it's very nice. It's very, it's interesting. It's kind of a relief. It doesn't feel like a big deal. It's kind of abstract because it happened. I signed the paperwork on Thursday of last week, and they did the closing today with the lawyers. And so I was busy doing other things during the closing.
And what were you doing during the closing?
I was visiting with my dog. She and I are a therapy dog team. We were visiting the children's clinics in Tucson, Arizona, which is a whole comprehensive clinic set up for kids who have severe disabilities. And they get all sorts of help there, including therapy dogs.
Excellent. All right. So that's the big picture of where you've been, what you did, and what happened today, and a little bit into where you're going from here. So I don't know, is it too personal a question for me to ask you to tell the people how old you are?
No, I'm 69.
Okay, 69. And have you ever thought about retirement? I'm putting it in quotation marks. Like, how do you think about retirement?
Well, you could either put it in quotation marks or just erase it altogether, because I really never think of it in terms of retirement. Just in terms of the mechanics of the company, for the last I was the founder of the company. I designed all the products. The company specializes in multifunctional kind of transforming space-saving furniture the first product I did was is a Murphy bed, like a Murphy bed that people are familiar with. But when you raise up the bed, you have a full-size dining table sitting right where the bed was in a 2-second transformation. But for the last couple of years, I've had actually a couple running the business. Guy Busey is the CEO, and his wife Sarah Busey is the CFO. And part of that was to deliberately look after that founder problem. I don't know if it's got a better name or other names, but it's about me, just being too used to controlling too many things, and that it was clearly time to hand the responsibility to literally a next generation, which actually feels really good to me. Mm-hmm. And I always used to joke because the two of them ran the company and they're married to each other, and I was the owner, and I would joke to people that it's a family company. It's just not my family. But like now it's a family company and it's their family, and it's I'm so. But I've also started in the last a year ago started doing this therapy dog work as a volunteer thing, but I was kind of a maniac as a set designer. I was certainly a maniac as a furniture designer, and working, taking it as far as I could, staying up till midnight working on a prototype and showing back up at the factory at 6:30 the next morning. So I'm kind of doing the same thing with the therapy dog work, where we do it 5 or 6 days a week, sometimes a couple of different hospitals on a given day. And I've found ways to sort of use my design background and just thinking myself as a creative person to bring that to the dog therapy work. So I'm not retired. I'm on my third career. It just doesn't happen to pay anything other than enormous gratitude in my soul about it.
Which is not nothing.
Oh, it's plenty. It's great.
So one thought that comes to mind, actually I have two. I'll say them both. Business baggage and Throughline, just so I don't forget. Maybe we can get to what I'm thinking of as business baggage, but do you see a Throughline, because you're just kind of hinting at it now, from, maybe high school, where I remember you told me not too long ago that you thought you were not the good student, or you weren't the student type in your family, right? You were not the student, and you didn't realize until you got to geometry,
sophomore geometry, yes.
That, maybe I am a good student. And then, so again, the through line through everything in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, I wasn't a good student. I continued to think of myself as not a good student, but I somehow connected to sophomore geometry. Mm-hmm. I didn't really go that much further in math, and there were plenty of more advanced classes that I could have gone through. But I continued to not think of myself as a very good student. But it was, as not a very good student. But it was a while later when I was doing the engineering and design work for all this furniture that had so many it was really all about the mechanical elements, that I realized that without even thinking about it, I was applying all the geometry that I had learned in sophomore year in high school.
And so this idea of a through line, and I guess I want to just plant the seed of business baggage again, because what I mean is baggage that we drag from our childhood through our working adult life. Uh-huh. And so I think of you're not the good student in the family as part of the beginning of that baggage.
Well, I can do a good through line here.
Okay, go ahead.
There were troubles in my family. My father was a very difficult character to grow up with. I think my older brother got more nurturing, he got more nourishment from him than I did. So I was always kind of desperate to catch up and to please and so on. But also there were lots of things that didn't work very well. So one interpretation I could give myself, because I started puttering around in the garage and making things and sort of being curious about mechanics and engineering and so on as a really young kid. And one way of looking at it is that maybe the mechanics are far more dependable than the human relationships that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. So that was one part of it. The next part of the through line is that in the theater, there was a theater teacher named Robert Kyle who I kind of fell in love with. I just thought he was so interesting and relatable. He used to build roads from downtown Chicago to O'Hare Airport, and had gotten involved in the theater himself, and was teaching every aspect of it at the high school, including building the sets. And actually, I had a serious crush on a girl who I followed her up to the theater, which was on the third floor, and I saw everybody hammering nails and sawing wood, just like I wanted to do with my father, but he kind of never let me. So that was heaven for me, and I enjoyed that part. And then when I went to college and graduate school in set design, I learned about metaphors, about visual metaphors. I started to understand them and use them much better. And I still find them, a fascinating way to understand life. Visual metaphors, any other kind of metaphors where something that's happening out in in your life is a reflection of what might be going on in your mind, in your unconscious, or in your conscious, or whatever, but it tells a story. And I love that. That's one of the main things I miss a little bit about set design is the set designer, when they're really doing their job well, they're already starting to tell the story, or they're reinforcing the story in unconscious ways to the audience, before any actors even open their mouth.
And
or throughout.
recently you were telling me about what was different or unique about you as a set designer, what made your type of set design different. Maybe talk a little bit about that too, because I feel like that's part of the through line.
Yeah, it is definitely part of the through line, but that part of the through line has to do with my fascination with mechanics. Now, one of the weird things about my story is I never went to college or graduate school to get a degree in engineering and mechanical engineering. It's all been sort of seat of the pants and just from whatever. I mean, I don't know what the word talent means, but I just feel like I have an intuition of understanding forces and how things work, just from stopping and watching people putting things together and asking questions and so on, and embarrassing my son about that when we'd be walking down the street and I would ask a bunch of guys who were installing a stoplight why they were using that particular type of bolt to bolt it to the sidewalk, and he'd go, "Come on, Dad." So, but in the theater, I did find pretty early that was a strength of mine to apply to the theater. And of course, everyone has seen sets that do interesting transformations, but I really tried to I really focused on making the transformations part of that metaphor. So you weren't just going from one image to another. Like in something that's really well designed, the way that the set changes from one scene to another is also part of the meaning of the set, and it's also part of the metaphor. It's not just mechanics or housekeeping to turn something around. So and there, I could do examples of that if you want. I don't know.
Give me one.
One that just popped in my mind was I designed a set for a show about a writer who would always get lost in his fantasies and almost hallucinate that he was in other places. So he had there was an apartment scene, but it was kind of on a turntable, and he would kind of collapse onto the floor, and his world would change around him by the turntable shifting.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty basic one. I also designed Sondheim's production of The Assassins, the first production of that, called Assassins. And it's a little hard to describe in words, but the transformation, it was all about the exploration towards the West in the United States history. So the set, all the different scenes kept opening up further and further upstage away from the audience until you were finally left with this view out into the distance, and Huck Finn and another character, I forget who it was. It was probably Jim. No, I think it was just Huck Finn in that rendition. Anyway, he's just standing on a patch of floor, and that patch of floor suddenly lifts up and starts rolling upstage off to the west as the act ends, rolling and spinning around. Anyway, I mean, it's hard to do it in words, but just I always loved that kind of thing.
And let me ask you, the fact that you felt you had this intuition or talent or whatever we want to call it, but didn't have a degree, did that ever make you feel I don't know, a lack of self-confidence or doubt yourself, or did you see that another way?
I saw it another way. I mean, I sometimes wondered if getting an engineering degree, because we hired some engineers at my company that had real engineering degrees, and I could watch them crunch numbers and do the delta this and blah blah, I learned some general principles just as a way of thinking about it, but I didn't know the math, I thought it was admirable, but I didn't feel constrained by it. I almost felt like I was in some ways more liberated
Mhm.
to try things. I mean, my whole ethos was about just try stuff.
Mhm.
One thing I realized at some point was that I feel like I had a really good intuitive sense about strength and structure from demolishing things.
Mm.
So when I was younger and I did some work, demolishing parts of houses to do renovations, or my own work, any kind of demolition work teaches you about how hard it is to pull a particular screw out of a particular board, or how to separate two things that are joined in a particular way. And it even kind of made me laugh to realize that I knew how to put things together because I'd had good experience in taking them apart.
Mm.
And the entire company was kind of, the story of that company was I got divorced. I moved to an apartment in New York City that had two bedrooms, and I was going to sleep in the living room. I wanted my two kids to each have one of the bedrooms. I was going to sleep in the living room. I ordered a Murphy bed to be delivered. I didn't even know what kind of cabinet I might build to surround it, to hide it, but it was being delivered that morning. And I woke up and thought, it would be nice to have both my dining table in this, main room and my bed. There must be some way to do that. And I started playing around with pieces of foam core at my set design modeling desk, and came up with something just really crude that I thought would work, and called the place and canceled the delivery of the Murphy bed. And then after a little while, figured it out well enough that I could build a first test model of it. But there are certainly times when it's gotten me in a little bit of trouble, but just that attitude of there must be some way of
Mm.
of solving this, and then just responding. I mean, I sometimes people would ask me at the factory about it, about the process of figuring out some of these things. Is that I would think it through as well as I could. I'm talking about the mechanical designs of the furniture. I would think it through as well as I could for a first stage, and do the drawings and cut the part and have the parts cut and machined and everything else by these computerized machines, and then put it all together for a first prototype. And then I would just shut up and listen to what it was trying to tell me about
Mm.
the forces or the strains, or something that's bending or sagging or hard to lift, or or whatever. So and I kind of enjoyed that part of it, that it was just like a connection between me and the thing, and then I was responding to what it was now telling me.
Mm. I love that.
I do feel like there was some kind of freedom in not having the degree,
Right.
because it's just trying things.
And it just reminds me of my mother, talking about business baggage,
Yeah.
because she was a fashion designer, and I've been talking a little bit about her recently because of Mother's Day and the different things that I learned from her, either to do or not to do because she did them. But she always, as a fashion designer, because she was totally self-taught, said, and very proudly, with pride, I don't cut, sew, draw, or drape.
Ah,
And, she just got other people to do those things for her. And so similarly, I think it did free her up to, just figure out what could work and not be constrained by what one would have learned in design school.
yes, maybe. There's one big difference about that, because I had really worked hard to learn how to do everything, how to run these computerized machines, how to use table saw, and just all sorts of techniques. So, not techniques, skills, cabinet making skills, and
Mhm.
and metalworking skills, and so on. And in some ways, I think that was helpful to the company, to the growth and the kind of the vibe in the company, was because here was the guy who founded it and owned the company and was designing, and he's crawling around on the floor underneath one of these beds to figure out
Hmm.
what part is binding against some other part. That it was, the hands-on part of it was the part
Hmm.
where I was getting, that's where I was really learning how a particular product would behave, as opposed to having other people take care of it and then I walk out for an inspection. It was not that
Right.
way at all.
Interesting.
The other thing, as terms of business Throughline, was that for me, just personally, like psychologically, the theater's beautiful, and I love the metaphors, and I enjoyed working with people and so on. But it always gnawed at me a little bit that it wasn't useful, like it didn't directly help people. Now,
Hmm.
you could have a debate about that with people I know in the theater who and of course I'm not putting the theater down. I'm just putting, from my own life, that was something that bothered me, as if I was following an instruction from my father to not do anything that actually is useful to people. And then I started, from the theater, I started doing more of corporate design, like product launch meetings and very large trade show booths and things for products. And it used all the same kind of thinking in terms of coming up with a metaphor. I mean, I designed some set for a pharmaceutical company that was showing how this particular drug could get into the cell to help with diabetes. And I had things flying moving over the head of the audience to enter into a cell that was on stage. And, I had the fun with the metaphors too, but it was about developing medications. It was about selling, CBS's upcoming season to their advertisers. It was more in the real world than.
And are you saying that felt more like you were helping?
It felt like I was doing something more useful and practical and sort of
Hmm.
solid. It's sort of like doing something more in the world. Significant for me, part of my through line was that my father, even though he did work in business, he kind of didn't respect it, and he really felt like he was much more of an intellectual and a thinker, and almost prided himself on not being practical and not being part of the world, of how things work in the world. My grandfather, who had founded and built a successful manufacturing company, was just far more connected with real things. It actually was a franchise model. So not only did he have a good manufacturing business, but it helped other people who could buy the franchise and kind of have their own business, a business of their own, but with the help of the parent company, with all the formulas and marketing materials and everything prepared. So he was very much involved in the real world. So for me, this whole arc has been from the theater to sort of the theater applied to corporate communication, like product launch meetings and conventions and trade shows and things like that. And then the final place for me was something absolutely practical, a factory that manufactured things that all had to be delivered. They had to work properly. They had to work on, be delivered on time, and people had to get their paychecks every week and so on. So that's I'm very happy to have ended up there, given where I started.
Okay, that was a lot of fun, at least for me. And there's more fun in part 2 when Loren continues his story about how his divorce-forced idea for a better Murphy bed started as a prototype and evolved into Innova Bed, a company with 100 employees, a factory, and big-name clients like Disney and the U.S. government. So stay tuned for part 2 coming soon. In the meantime, if you want to build a thriving business on your own terms, the first step is to sign up for my quick tips at marketing-mentortips.com. Once you're on the site, you'll find lots more resources, including my simplest marketing plan. So enjoy, and I'll see you next time.